She drove as carefully as she could, trying not to panic, even though the big truck quickly closed in on her. She'd noticed a tiny dark thing speeding before it, and it chilled her to her core. She couldn't understand how such a beautiful day had gone awry. But everything would go from bad to worse with each passing minute. Pregnant mom on her way to give birth sees truck lose control, she doesn't hesitate. When Lizzie decided to take a drive that day, she'd only wanted some time away from her cooped-up house, while also visiting her friend who lived away from town. But she wasn't in her car for an hour when she saw the truck barreling toward her. She was still trying to figure out what was happening when she saw the tiny object speeding before the vehicle. Elizabeth Keeley, or Lizzie to her close friends, had always been a careful woman. A mom to a beautiful 3-year-old girl and a wife to the best husband across the northern hemisphere, Lizzie had ensured that each part of her life was perfect. For the longest while, each of her plans saw fruition, be it her academics, professional career, or personal life. But what would happen on the road that day would be chaotic and completely out of the blue. Lizzie had made a name for herself as the resident dentist coon cat mom in her town. With her husband, Brad, and daughter Kim, she'd cut out a perfect slice of heaven in North Dakota. Already expecting her second child, life couldn't be any more perfect. She had no idea how much a road accident would impact everything she'd worked so hard to build. Lizzie was about a fortnight from her due date when it all happened. It had been a long week, and although she'd spent it at the house since she'd started her maternity leave, she couldn't wait for it to end. Early afternoon, she decided to leave the house for a while. Since she'd been cooped up inside throughout the week, she saw it as the best way to spend the rest of the day. After ensuring her 3-year-old was safe under her husband's care, she grabbed her coat and car keys and stepped into the afternoon sun. After a quick car inspection, she hopped in and kicked it into gear. Lizzie came out of the driveway as carefully as possible, taking her time since her belly made the entire process a bit restrictive. She had no clue what was awaiting her out there. Lizzie spent a few minutes on her neighborhood's road before pulling into the interstate. Although she hated using the highway and could have taken a different route to her friends, she needed to spend as less time on the road as possible. This was the best way to do that. The interstate was free of traffic that afternoon, which was odd because it was always peppered with vehicles. Lizzie's mind was focused on the road when she heard a screech of metal ahead. Lizzie's sight speared into the stretch of road before her. A red truck lumbered toward her direction on the other side of the road. A small dark object traced before it. Lizzie narrowed her eyes to get a better look at the object. She thought it was a motorcycle until it got close enough for her to get a good look. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was. Lizzie was driving at about 35 miles per hour when she realized what she was speeding toward. It was one of the truck's rear tires, bouncing as it got closer by the second. Lizzie froze behind the wheel, knowing the many horror stories surrounding tires leaving trucks on highways. She knew a man whose life had been claimed by a stray tire and held in a bitter cry. She hadn't even reacted to the situation when it got worse. The red truck before Lizzie wobbled about before tipping over. Its massive trailer spread across the interstate's width, stretching over to Lizzie's lane. If the tire didn't get her, the trailer would. Lizzie instinctively pressed the brake button as she switched lanes, moving as far as possible. The speeding tire shot past her, but she held her breath. The trailer was still barreling her way. Lizzie continued driving away from the lane until her car was on the dirt. The trailer skidded past her as the tire had, and Lizzie pressed on the brake pedal fully until her vehicle came to a stop. She struggled out of her car, hurrying to see if whoever was driving the truck was hurt. The massive vehicle had come to a stop after scrapping the road for minutes. Lizzie reached the cab and called out. What happened next left her stunned. Since the truck had tipped over, she couldn't pry the door open. She called out again, running to the front of the truck and banging a rock against the windshield until it cracked and a man came out. He had a bleeding cut on his arm and a bump on his forehead. Stumbling toward Lizzie, he asked if she was okay. She was about to answer when a sharp pain shot through her lower belly. Her eyes widened as a single thought seared her mind. The baby's coming early. The pain reshot through Lizzie's belly, firing toward her thighs. Her lower abdomen contracted with pain as her water broke. But before she could say anything, the man sprung into action. He limped to Lizzie and carefully helped her back to her car. Wincing in pain, he insisted he could drive and promised to get her to the delivery room. The pain burning through Lizzie's body had become too much by now. She breathed in and out, hoping they'd reach the hospital in time. The man drove them back to town, his focus glued to the road before them. The blood from his arm had reduced, but he seemed in more pain than he was letting on. They reached the hospital, and he flew out of the car, returning with nurses and a stretcher. Lizzie's doctor called her family after the hospital booked her in and commenced her delivery. Everything went smoothly, and Lizzie and her family welcomed their fourth family member. But as they left the following day, Lizzie saw a familiar face waiting for them. The man she'd helped out of the truck was smiling at the end of the hall. His arm was in a sling, and his head was wrapped in bandages. He thanked Lizzie for getting him out of the truck, informing her that it blew up shortly after they left the scene. Lizzie thanked him for bringing her to the hospital despite his injuries. She didn't know what she would have done if he wasn't there to help her. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.